Hi, Your Excellency. Good to see you again.
Yes, nice to see you as well.
Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation. I know you think about reconciliation frequently, but on the actual day, what goes through your mind?
Well, today I was involved in a big event at TD Centre, and there were thousands of children there, school-age children, and it was just wonderful to be able to talk to them about how we need to build a renewed relationship in Canada between all Canadians, Indigenous people, and other Canadians that live here, and the fact that these young people are learning about the history of the country. It's really important, I think, for me and as Governor General to be able to work with the younger generation because they are the next leaders.
And is it your sense that that is happening based on your interactions with all these kids, which I know you get to do a lot of in your position?
Well, first of all, it's a complex issue. There were, for so long, total silence. A lot of people that talk to me say they never knew anything about residential schools, as an example. And over the last few years, it has become an important conversation in Canada. To me, that's a really good beginning because it's such a complex issue also to be able to teach in our Indigenous languages, because languages are part of our culture, and it's really important to bring back so a lot of people have lost the language, but there's always ways of bringing it back, and I know some cultures that have brought their languages back, and for me this is just part of our growth as a country, and to pay respect to the culture and the languages that are originally the first peoples of this country.
Part of what you're talking about forms the nexus of a number of calls to action that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission set out. An independent analysis recently from the Yellowhead Institute found that of the 94 calls to action, 13 have so far been fulfilled. Are you disappointed at all with the pace of progress?
I've read the calls to action many times, and what I find, before I answer your question, is that there's very complex issues related to those calls to action, and it requires many partners to implement them. So as a result of that, I think, first of all, things are slow. I've been in this work for almost 50 years, and when I look back 20 years, I can see a lot of changes taking place. And I think right now, because the TRC report is out, there's recommendations, calls to action on a number of reports. And I think it's really important for us to continue working on them. I'm not involved in the implementation of these recommendations, so I don't know really what has happened between the time the report was released and today, but Indigenous people say it's too slow, and I can understand that because the living conditions that people are living in across the country are pretty severe. And of course they're going to be anxious and perhaps frustrated that things aren't moving very quickly. And I'm not trying to say that things should have changed by now, because having gone through the political evolution of this country, I can see how slow things can be, but I can also understand from an Indigenous perspective that we want things to change more quickly.
Are you satisfied with the level of political will that exists to make that happen?
As far as I'm concerned, the Prime Minister, when he got elected, made a lot of commitments, and he continues to keep those commitments. He works with a large bureaucracy in government that has the responsibility of figuring out how to implement those changes and recommendations. And as I talked to various ministers and the Prime Minister, And I feel they're still very committed to the process.
And I certainly take that in the complexity involved in pursuing all that. But I have interviewed a number of people from Indigenous communities, for example, who are worried about the quality of their water, not just boil water advisories, but the actual quality of their water, or the commitment to, for example, setting up a framework to ensure that unmarked graves are actually pursued in the way that they should be. Do you share any of those concerns? I know you have a different view than many of us because you see the insides of a lot of political things here that we don't, but do you sympathize with the frustrations they feel?
Well, first of all, I'm apolitical, so I don't get very involved in political development in terms of discussions, but I have the power to convene people, and I have been doing that. I find that you don't always find a solution the first time you talk. It's like working with government. You don't often find the solution the first time you meet with them, but it can take time. I was part of the negotiations for the Constitution and land claims agreements, and those took years, like the Pope's apology. That took over 20 years for it to happen. So, you have to, I think, really think about the process and how I feel we should speed things up, but it's not up to me. But if we want to speed things up, we have to be very focused and talk about all the different difficulties surrounding any issue, whether it be a calls to action or dealing with a community that needs fresh drinking water, like what we had in Iqaluit 2 years ago. So I think a lot of these calls to action recommendations are, when you read the paragraph, it sometimes feels like it just can be done right away. But when you start to meet with different people and different partners, then those complexities come in because you have to agree.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the significance of language, and I was reminded when you said that of about a week ago you met with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, I believe perhaps even in this room. He employed, and I don't want to mispronounce it, but you said a word in that meeting that...
Can you say it? Ayuyneta?
Thank you. You say it much better than I do. He actually repeated it. He concluded his remarks to Parliament by talking about that word, you, and the meaning of it. When you heard him do that, what did you think?
Well, I was overjoyed because he used an Inuktitut word that is very important in our language, in our culture, because I heard it when I was growing up all the time with the people that were having discussions in our homes, and when they'd leave, they'd say, Ayuyneta, which meant don't give up, never give up, So when he used that word in the House of Commons, I was touched. I was very touched, and I'm overjoyed that he actually remembered the word, and he pronounced it perfectly.
He did, yes, much better than me. Why did you? From what I've read, you've talked about that word frequently, and it means something. It means a great deal to you. Why did you want to say it in that instance to him?
I said it at the end of our conversation when he came to see me, because it embodies him. When I was thinking about what I would say at the end of our visit, the word came to me, and I just felt that he embodied the word. And I told him that. I said, I'm going to teach you a word that what I feel embodies you. And the word is Ayuyneta. And so I explained to him what it meant. And he took it to heart. So I was pleased.
His speech was so well received, and I know you'll be as familiar as everyone watching now with what's happened in the days since, in basically what's come to light since then, particularly about whom the speaker recognized in President Zelensky's presence. What do you think about that?
Well, I've been reading upon all the rules and regulations as how it goes in Parliament, in the House of Commons, the Prime Minister's office, and from what I can see, because I've never been a member of Parliament, although I've been in politics for a long time, but mostly outside of government, there's some very strict rules that they follow, and each of those members are able to invite individuals, and I would imagine, I can't really imagine how it happened or why it happened, But I believe it was a real shock to everybody.
And as the country's head of state, do you have any particular sentiment about, in particular, the sensitivity of the issue, given Russia's justification in some part for invading Ukraine, which is quote-unquote denazification?
Canada will continue to support Ukraine unequivocally, and it's really important to continue to work with Ukraine on how we support them. And as you know, they made announcements during the visit, and unfortunately what happened really affected how people felt about the event that was so positive. I think what I would say is, as a country, and that's what I'm responsible for, is that we continue to work with other countries to embody a rule-based world, and a world that embodies democracy, and we will just continue to work with other countries on that. And diplomacy is an important part of my role internationally and nationally as well.
I think, yeah, that's why I asked, just as the head of state, and without assigning any blame, understanding that the rules and procedures, was it embarrassing at all, do you think, for our country that this happened?
Yes, it was very embarrassing. It was a shock and an embarrassment.
And have you made any overtures to President Zelensky as the head of state since then?
Not yet, no.
Do you intend to?
Perhaps, yes, we're talking about it right now.
Okay, I appreciate your time today, Your Excellency. A real pleasure to chat with you again.
You're welcome.